Vayamos haciendo un lado, tu color y mi color, tu color y mi color. Vayamos haciendo un lado.
Vayamos haciendo un lado, tu color y mi color, tu color y mi color. Vayamos haciendo un lado.
Ya no tenemos razón para ignorar el amor, para ignorar el amor. Es tiempo de reflexión.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is John Fanistil, Executive Director here at VIA International. On behalf of the entire team at VIA International and the VIA Cafe, we welcome you to this edition of Las Noticias from the Border. It's a weekly program we've been running where we're looking at things that are happening along and across the US-Mexico border, or things that are happening in the news from the perspective of the US-Mexico border. And today, it's a great pleasure of mine to introduce a couple of friends. One, an old friend, I would call him, and one, a new friend. My friend Dan Watman, with whom I've worked for many, many years through the Friends of Friendship Park Coalition. And Dan has distinguished himself across the 15 years that I've known him by an extraordinary dedication to the Binational Garden of Native Plants, which is located right there at Friendship Park at the US-Mexico border, Playas de Tijuana. And then over the recent months, I've gotten to know Mike Wilken through his work with a Borderlands initiative, and have learned of Mike's expertise in the subject matter, which is ours today. Mike is an expert in Kumeyaay Ethnobotany, having worked for many years at Cal State San Marcos, now a resident of Baja California. And so we're going to hear today from Mike and Dan. I welcome you to those of you who are with us on Facebook. Please follow along. If you'd like to join us in Zoom for future editions, we'll be reconvening in the new year, and drop us a line and I'll be glad to add you to our mailing list. But for now, I'm going to invite everybody here with me in Zoom to join me with a round of applause as we welcome to Las Noticias from the Border, Mike Wilken. Mike, welcome.
Thank you so much. Whoops, it's really great to be here, and I'm so honored to be doing this talk today for VIA International. I've been so impressed with the work that VIA International is doing, that John, Elisa, Rio, Roberto, Aida, and the whole support team are doing. It's just fantastic. There's such a need for this in the border region, and it's just really an honor to get to know all of you and to be inspired by the work that you're doing. So today I'm going to tell you a little about the subject of my book, Kumeyaay Ethnobotany, and I just want to mention, as we'll see in this talk, why this is relevant to the border region. You know, for thousands of years there was no border, and that's part of what we're hoping people will get come away from with this talk, thinking about what that border has meant for Native people in this region. So my work is dedicated to Baja California's Native peoples, past, present, and future, and to all, that means including all of you who work for the preservation of Baja California's natural and cultural heritage. And this is the great Generala Teodora Cuero, as she was doing a special blessing for some woolly blue curls, a fabulous native plant that she collected that particular day up in the Sierra Juarez. And I also want to thank those who helped make the publication of this book possible. San Diego State helped me get through my master's program and do a thesis, and then based on that master's thesis, which is also available online, so if you'd rather not buy the book, you can just go and find most of the same information without all the beautiful photographs, but online. And then when it came time to publish it, Sunbelt Publications, and then all of these different sponsors, many of the tribes from San Diego County and other foundations helped make it possible. So this is a story that starts a long time ago, longer than our lifetimes, longer than 1,000 lifetimes. It's a story that goes back to the beginning of time, when everything was covered by ocean. Two brother beings lived under the ocean, and after millions of years of thinking and thinking, they began to create the earth, the land, the people, the plants and the animals, the sky, the moon, and the sun. Early on, plants and animals were people too, but slowly they evolved into the way that we know them today. For thousands of years on the western edge of the continent, original peoples and their descendants spent their lives living along the coasts, moving in annual cycles through valleys and foothills to the mountains and down to the deserts in one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. In the course of a year, they could gather seaweed along the beach in the winter, greens in the springtime as they moved up through inland valleys and foothills, pine nuts in the mountains in summer, and acorns in the fall as they headed back down to the coast, along with countless other plants along the way. The accumulated experience of hundreds of generations of native Californians interacting with their plants and landscapes, refining and building on that body of knowledge, has sustained native populations for thousands of years in ways that stand in stark contrast to what has happened to the land and the people in the last 2.5 centuries. In spite of these dramatic changes, today some of the ancient plant knowledge is carried on by the descendants of those who have lived here for so long. We would do well to listen for their wisdom. Ethnobotany is the study of the interactions between people and plants. The people I've had the great honor to work with and to know as friends are Kumeyaay, Paipai, and Coat people of Baja California. Kumeyaay territory reaches from the north around Escondido in the United States to Santo Tomas, Mexico in the south, from the Pacific Ocean to the Colorado Desert. This territory, the Kumeyaay Nation, was bisected by an international border starting in 1848. Before that time, during the Spanish and Mexican periods, the area south of the present-day border all the way down to the tip of the peninsula was originally all that land was just called California, but as it extended up into California, the lower half was called Baja or Antigua California, meaning lower or old California. And the area north of the border all the way up to Northern California was called Alta or Upper California. Together, they form a continuum simply known as the Californias. In the middle of this continuum, the region along the Pacific coast from Central California well down into Northern Baja California, with a Mediterranean-type climate, forms part of the California Floristic Province. And I'm talking especially of the part we call the Bight of the Californias, you can see on this map, from around Santa Barbara, north of Santa Barbara, down to around El Rosario. That's a particular part of the California Floristic Province that has a lot in common, although there are subtle changes going from south to north. Oops. And there are many similarities in vegetation throughout this region. As we go to the east, the desert environments are found from north to south in the region, and they also have many similarities in the types of vegetation. Thanks to these similarities, many of the plants found in Kumeyaay territory are also found in the territories of other native groups of Baja and Alta California, and in many cases, their uses may have been similar. Kumeyaay territory is located right in the heart of this continuum, partly in Baja California and partly Alta California. And what we're seeing here is the Cerro Cuchuma or Tecate Peak, a sacred peak to the Kumeyaay that has been divided literally by this terrible wall in between the two nations. Within Kumeyaay territory, there are many variations in the way people live and speak, including Ipai language in the north and Tipai language in the central and southern areas. But there are also many things about traditional culture and knowledge that are broadly shared throughout the Kumeyaay Nation, including ethnobotanical knowledge and practice. This common culture that transcends the recently imposed international border forms what I'm calling a shared heritage of the Californias. Today, south of the border, many Kumeyaay live in remote ranches where native plants may still be abundant and continue to form an essential part of local economies. Many of the elders I've worked with over the years grew up speaking only their native language, walking barefoot, getting their water from a creek, and living in homes made from local plants. Some of their grandparents remembered stories of missionaries, soldiers, and marauding Colorado River Indian tribes. They've been extremely poor and faced countless hardships, but at the same time, their native culture and knowledge of the land often help them survive. Many of the plant specialists I've worked with never had a formal education, but their vast knowledge of plants and every part of the environment never ceases to amaze me. Whoops. Although many have now passed on, fortunately, new generations of elders and recently more and more younger people have become interested in learning and transmitting plant knowledge. One of the great joys of my life has been the enduring friendships with many of the elders that I've had the opportunity to work with over the last 40 years. People like Teodora Cuero of La Huerta, who passed away in her mid-90s only a few years ago. Teodora was a dear friend, a teacher, and kindred spirit whose joyful and dignified sense of being and profound affection for the land of her ancestors has been an inspiration for many. John Mesa, a traditional singer, and as he described himself, a binational Indian, spent many of his final years mentoring and passing on his knowledge of songs, plants, and other aspects of traditional culture to his students. Celia Silva of San Jose de la Zorra, whose wonderful sense of humor and vast knowledge of plants made visits with her an absolute delight. Fortunately, some elders like Teresa Castro continue to share their skills and wisdom in their own communities and at reservations, parks, universities, and other sites in the US and Mexico. A younger generation of up-and-coming elders also continues to keep ethnobotanical knowledge and practice alive through teaching and the ongoing use of native plants, plant foods and medicines, tools, construction materials, and ceremony. Many of this generation are also fluent speakers of their native languages and participate in teaching and research. Kumeyaay, Paipai, and Coatl languages in this area are closely related to other native languages of Baja California and Arizona, belonging to a larger family of languages known as the Yuman languages. Once the dominant languages spoken in the region, these languages are now spoken fluently by only a small number of native speakers, many of them living in Baja California. The Yuman languages and their broad extension from the Pacific coast to the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River remind us of the thousands of years of history in this region. Relationships between these languages, such as Kumeyaay and Kukapa and Coatl, and Paipai and the upland Pai languages, reflect ancient cultural connections. During my fieldwork, I had the opportunity to collaborate with many of these native speakers to document plants and their uses in both Kumeyaay language and in Spanish. In many cases, the names of plants are similar or the same throughout this region and can help us reconstruct ancient relationships between native groups. The archaeological record of the region tells the story of how ancient peoples created stone tools like matatis to process seeds like bitter acorns and cherry stones and transform them into nutritious foods. Some Kumeyaay continue to carry on these traditions today. Fragments of cordage, nets, and sandals found in archaeological sites have been dated at over 9,000 years old and are reminders of the ancient origins of traditions carried on today by a few native artisans like Teresa Castro, a Coatl and Paipai speaker of Santa Catarina. Prehistoric basketry, occasionally found in archaeological sites, also reminds us that native peoples from throughout the Southern California and Baja California region have long been producing baskets made from local plant materials for processing and storage of plant foods. Split juncus coil basketry, strong, useful, and durable, is also part of the shared cultural heritage of the Californias. Whoops. Today's basket makers create an astounding variety of beautifully crafted designs and shapes using the same basic techniques passed on from their grandmothers. In Baja California, these baskets are made primarily in the Kumeyaay community of San Jose de la Zorra, using two types of native juncus found in creeks and wetlands of the region. So we can see here the two different types of juncus. One is the many split pieces of juncus that form the tail, or known as cola in Spanish, or foundation of the coil. And then the weaver, the thread, or hilo as they call it in Spanish, that the one piece of strand of juncus, which comes from a different type of juncus, and I'll show you those two different types. This is juncus acutus, the one used for the foundation of the basket. You may have had an encounter with this somewhere along the way. It grows in wetlands and it's kind of pokey on the end. And if you get too close to it, it will say, keep your distance. And the other type is the juncus textilis, or basket weaver's juncus, something like that. And we can see here that it grows more spread out. It grows in nice, moist, rich soil here in the shadow of oak trees. And we can see the beautiful reddish brown bases of the stalks or stems of the juncus. And that is used for making those beautiful designs. Willow baskets made through an ingenious coil technique using branches and leaves of the native willow tree may be used to safely store the fall acorn harvest. Weavers create a strong wall that allows air in to help acorns stay dry while keeping bugs and other critters out. The development of pottery over the last 1,000 years also provided native Californians with more options for processing and storing plant materials. The dried stalks of Mojave yucca proved to be an ideal material for firing pottery. Cooking, toasting, soaking, storage, and other uses of pottery have allowed the Kumeyaay to use their plant resources more intensively and in an ever wider number of ways. The arrival of the Spanish in the region beginning in 1540 and starting permanent colonization in about 1769 drastically affected the Kumeyaay and their relationships with their environments. The introduction of foreign diseases, livestock ranching, and agriculture would forever change the Kumeyaay way of life. No longer able to freely move throughout their traditional territories, many of them eventually took up a more sedentary way of life. The Kumeyaay found ways to transform their world while maintaining traditional knowledge that helped them survive. The shared heritage of plant knowledge has continued to provide food, medicine, tools, construction materials, and ceremonial items. Today, their lands in Baja California have been reduced to a fraction of their original territories. They're located in 4 federally recognized communities, plus this one, which is Santa Catarina, where the Coat speakers live. Although these communities usually have a central village, many people still travel seasonally to remote ranches or outposts, such as this cowboy outpost way out in the hills in the municipality of Tecate. Fortunately, these communities are located in different ecosystems. So between them all, there still exists an extensive knowledge of a variety of plants and ecosystems. So here we're seeing La Huerta, and this is typical of these communities. It's hard to see where the there is, where if there's a there, as they say, they're usually spread out throughout these areas. This is looking from San Antonio Necua up to the sacred mountain of Sierra de los Pinos and Sierra Blanca. It's in the northeast corner of the Guadalupe Valley. The area of Juntas de Neji, this is one of the polygons where the Ha'a Canyon or Cottonwood Canyon the river flows through. And San Jose de la Zorra, where the basket makers live. So the book provides kind of a catalog of 47 different plants and their uses based on interviews with different members of the communities. And I tried to provide the English and Spanish names, and then as many of the Kumeyaay variants as I can find. There's generally descriptions of the different plants, and then citations or quotations from the people that I got to work with and how they describe the different uses of the plants. So that's about as far as I'm going to go today. I want to hand this over to Daniel. And I just want to mention that I'm just so impressed with the work that Daniel Watman is doing. It's so important to help people keep remembering that this artificial border that divides us, it's also a place where people come together and things come together. And for thousands of years, you know, the vegetation throughout this area was not stopped, or the wildlife corridors were not stopped by a border. And you may know that very recently Kumeyaay people have been protesting the construction of the wall at the border. Unfortunately, the judge ruled against them, but that's part of you know, hundreds of years of resistance on the part of Kumeyaay people against the appropriation of their lands and the creation of that artificial border. And just one final thought is that during my time working with the tribes, I've had the honor to help take many of the plant specialists up to work with the tribes, sharing their plant knowledge, their basket making knowledge, pottery knowledge. And unfortunately, due to, even before the pandemic, due to the many terrible policies that shut down the border and make it harder for people to get across, those kinds of activities have not been happening, which is really a loss especially for the tribes north of the border. So the plant knowledge itself is something that is so valuable, and that we're really lucky that there's still a people here in Baja California that carry that on. Okay, Daniel.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. And yes, thank you for that great presentation, Mike. And thank you for your book in general. We have used it in the garden on a regular basis. It's kind of, for me, it's become like the Bible for native flora in our region. So I really appreciate all the work. I know how many years went into that, and I really appreciate it. And the region really appreciates it. And thank you to VIA for this platform and for all the work you do and making the garden possible, being kind of the umbrella organization for the garden and for Friendship Park. This is the Binational Friendship Garden of native plants, what you're seeing on the screen. And it is located inside Friendship Park, which for those who don't know is right at the US-Mexico border, right at the San Diego-Tijuana border, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And the garden is located inside that park, inside Friendship Park. And you can kind of make out maybe in the picture on the left, or my left, I think it's your left, it's made up of circles, binational circles that go through the primary border wall. And the last picture down here is, the picture on the bottom there is a blown up shot of the last circle, which is we call it the wish garden, where people write wishes on rocks. And in general, the idea of the Binational Friendship Garden of native plants is to create a space where people can make friends through the fence and promote collaborate to promote native flora. So let's see, and these are just some examples of native flora that's in our garden. And like Mike emphasized, native flora, of course, has been here much longer than our garden has been here, than Friendship Park has been here, than the border has been here. We're just kind of this United States-Mexico thing is just kind of a blip on the screen of how long the first people were here. The Kumeyaay have been coming to this very spot, where Friendship Park is located, for 8,000 years to harvest and to fish. They migrated on a seasonal basis, and up until the border was created and enforcement started. And in 1971, there was the inauguration of Borderfield State Park, and there was an official gesture of unity and friendship when the then First Lady Pat Nixon came, and she actually planted a tree of the same species of trees that were planted already on the Mexican side. And she actually had her Secret Service cut the barbed wire. That was all there was at that time. It was a barbed wire fence that separated the two countries, and she had them cut it so that she could go over to the Mexican side and greet people and hug children. And there's recordings of her saying things like that we don't need a border, and I hope there won't be a fence here too long. In March of 2007, I had been doing these binational friendship events, yoga classes and poetry readings and language exchanges. And in 2007, there was middle school students and high school students on both sides of the border came together and planted a small plot, rectangular plot. And that was the beginnings of the Binational Garden. And even though the walls continued to grow, our garden continued to grow, and we did an expansion in March of 2012 to the current circular design. And over the years, the garden has grown, and the community around it has grown, and we've done workshops, and people have visited from all over the world. And there's been times where families have come together at the garden that are separated by immigration status. And it's become somewhat of an icon here locally. And I wanted to highlight one of these events in May of 2018. One of the communities that Mike talked about, in Juntas de Neji, one of the elders from that community, Yolanda Mesa, came, and we were privileged to have her in the gardens, and she gave a workshop on native flora, and it was quite a popular event. There were around 60 people present. And unfortunately, in January of this year, the garden was completely destroyed on the US side. And up until that point, maintaining the garden and doing these events and doing cross-border collaboration and friendship was always a challenge. And the negotiations with Border Patrol were painstaking, to say the least. And it's just, the friendship and gardening and things like that just aren't their thing. It's not a priority for Border Patrol. So, but we did have an agreement with them that the garden was allowed to exist, and there was a small amount of public access allowed. And so this destruction just came out of nowhere. There was no notice. There was nothing. I came out there on one day, and somebody told me that morning someone had come in and destroyed the garden. And luckily that someone got pictures. They raised the garden to the ground, some 150 native plants, a 500-pound bench, a sign that explained the garden, a heavy-duty sign, all the pathways. They just basically made the garden disappear on the US side. And the picture on the right was taken about a month before the destruction. So that's what it looked like on the US side before. And like I said, luckily someone took some pictures and I posted those on social media of the destruction, and there was an outpouring of community support that allowed the replanting, and Border Patrol eventually allowed the replanting to happen. It got into the media, and a couple days after the destruction, the community came to the garden. We had an event there. It was kind of almost like a funeral. There were a lot of people were really upset. There was over 100 people there, and talked about what the garden meant to them, and tried to give hopeful messages for the future. And Border Patrol agreed to meet with us a few days later and allowed us to partially replant the garden. So we started replanting. We did a replant with some community members in the end of January, and volunteers came out, some longtime volunteers that had been part of the garden for a lot of years. Wade McKnight was one of the main people that came, and we replanted the garden partially, and we were allowed to, by Border Patrol, to keep going out once a month since then. So we've been doing outings to the garden. We go out to the garden twice a week on the Mexican side, and we're allowed to go out on the US side once a month. So we try to make it binational. And these are some pictures of our cross-border outings, COVID style. And these are some of the plants in the garden. This is the agave shawi. This one is actually on the Mexican side, and we have a couple of new ones on the US side. And this plant, this species, is actually in Mike's book. So I was hoping Mike might be able to comment on any tidbits or any information you can tell us about the agave shawi.
Sure. Probably many of you know the agaves. They're found throughout northwestern Mexico and southwestern United States. They're really important for food and for fiber. And of course, in central Mexico, agave was used to make pulque and also just as an important food. And it's one of the pictures in my book is a little stand I found in Tecate, and you see these spring up sometimes during the season, where they bring up the center from the agave that has been cooked, and they sell little pieces of it. So we know that throughout that whole region and well up here into the desert areas of the northwestern Mexico and southwestern United States, the agave was super important for native groups. And in fact, I was just contacted recently by archaeologists on working over on the Mexicali side, the Sonoran Desert. They're huge areas with the prehistoric remains of where people were cooking agaves. So not only do they find the rock, but you sometimes find what are called quids, which is when people are chewing the agave, they spit out the fiber, and that can actually become sort of fossilized or petrified, and an archaeologist can dig it up many years later. So we also know that there's documentation about native people eating the agave that goes back to the Cabrillo and to Crespi and Serra. So that's going back from 1540, and then eventually to the Crespi and Serra trips, which were 1769. So we know that's been a big source of food and fiber for people for a long time.
Cool. And I'm just going to name off a few plants. This is the, thank you, Mike. This is the Erogonum fascillatum, the California buckwheat. The one on the right, we just planted recently on the Mexican side. We're making a fourth circle, starting with a half circle on the Mexican side. And the one on the left was actually one of the ones that were demolished. I really like this plant because it's one of the only ones that I know of, one of the only native plants that I know of that in this region that flowers all year long. And I found some really interesting tidbits about it in Mike's book. It was used as a for the Kumeyaay. It was used as a way to let them know that when the flowers changed colors in the spring, that it was time to migrate to the hills to harvest piñons from the coastal region to the mountains. And since Mike's here, I'm wondering if he could give us a little more information about the California buckwheat.
Sure. A lot of people think because it's called buckwheat that it's mostly a food, and it is from the buckwheat family, which is a large family, the Eriogonum, and that includes the kind of buckwheat that we can eat. It's a Eurasian food plant, and that's what they make soba noodles out of and things like that. But our buckwheat here, it'd be very hard to take a lot of work to try to get food value out of their little teeny tiny seeds, but it is a favorite medicine. And I always remember that when I was working on my thesis, and I came to the part where I was trying to write up the section on the buckwheat. And I remembered how many different people said, this is a great medicine for digestive problems. If you feel like empacho, as they say, sort of swollen belly, or just you have diarrhea, or just not feeling good in your stomach, you can make a tea out of this. And they say you take the leaves, the flowers, or the roots, and kind of boil them up until they look like cinnamon tea, kind of a nice deep red color. And so I had been having those symptoms while I was writing this part up, and I thought, well, damn, I have this growing right out here in my garden. I'm going to go out and gather some and just try it. And santo remedio, as we say in Spanish, within 15, 20 minutes, I was cured after several days of that nagging problem. So, of course, all of these plant medicines, some of them are like any kind of medicine. You really need to know what you're doing. So I don't want to have you all rush out and, start using all of these without really informing yourselves first. But this is a great plant to know. It's good for your own gardens in your homes. And it will grow just about anywhere in Southern California's coastal areas.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. And this is the Toyan bush. Really quickly, this is the one on the left, is on the Mexican side. It's one of the sole survivors of all that the garden has gone through over the years. We had to transplant a lot of the plants out when they replaced the wall in 2012. It survived that transplant. And the one on the right is a new Toyan that we just planted. That's what the one on the left looked like when we first planted it 13 years ago. And it has survived its first summer. And after the first year of watering, most native plants, year to 2 years, don't need any water. So after the transplant in 2012, the one on the left has not been watered since then. It has root systems. I don't know, what would you say, Mike? Probably 20 feet deep, something like that, I would guess.
I think so. It's just a fantastic plant to use in your gardens. It's right now they're just covered with berries. So some people call it Christmas berry, Hollywood. It's just a beautiful plant. Once it's established, you can just forget about it. And I've used it in parks and green belts, and it's just so low maintenance. So I highly recommend it. Native people would gather the berries or the fruits, and they're very astringent. So they have to be like put on the coals or somehow sort of cooked a little, and then they lose that astringency, and they're quite edible.
Great. And then the last plant I wanted to mention, well, the white sage in general is a wonderful species for many reasons. And this particular plant was one of the survivors, or the only survivor of the destruction on the US side. It did not appear that any plant could have survived. Everything was razed to the ground. And then I noticed when we got to go out there in August that there was a little seedling, and we did not plant it. And so I knew that it was the plant that we transplanted back in 2011. So it gave me it inspired me and gave me a feeling of hope in general, that these root systems, the root systems of that plant represent the roots of the community, the roots of indigenous peoples of the region that have managed to survive, and the indigenous flora over several hundred years, thousands of years. And so I don't know if Mike, you want to comment a little bit about the white sage and its uses?
Sure, and it is an inspiring thing to see it coming out there. And again, thanks Daniel and everyone who's working with you on the park. It's an inspiring project, and stay with it. The sage can be used in so many ways. Many people don't realize that the seeds are kind of like chia, and I think they were an important food in the past, maybe not so much today, but I like to sometimes walk by a sage plant and after the blooms have dried up, and see if I can find a few little seeds and just taste them, because they have a wonderful flavor. The leaves are great for using as a medicinal tea, maybe mixed with something like yerba santa. But even just by themselves, you can make a tea, or you can put them on a pot on the stove and make it boil and take that nice vapor and breathe in that. It opens up your respiratory passages. And then also, of course, it's used as a smudge to get rid of bad energy. So in the past, that probably would have been thrown fresh right onto coals, and then people stand over it and kind of bring that smoke over them. Today there's a real problem that too much of this is being harvested, and often by non-Indians, people that may go through and just take everything in order to sell it, to make bundles and spiritual bundles, and then sell it when that may have been gathered in a way that really isn't good for the plant or for the planet or for the people that use it even. So there's kind of a movement afoot to try to make sure that people gathering this or selling it are doing it. It's traditionally a native tradition. It wouldn't even be sold. It would just be gifted, or people would only take what they needed for their own use. So do be very careful in your use of that, but I would again suggest that you try to grow some in your own yard so that you have a relationship with that plant and you can have it there when you need it.
Thank you, Mike. And with that, gracias. Another picture of Teodora, and we can open it up to questions, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Dan and Mike. On behalf of the crew here at VIA, and just a big round of applause, and thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'm going to ask just a couple of quick questions, one of each of you, and then we'll jump off of Facebook, and there's some questions lining up here in our Zoom room. But before we leave Facebook, I just want to quickly ask Dan, you mentioned the destruction of the garden in January. We know that a new wall is now planned for Friendship Park. Do you have a clear sense of whether the Binational Garden will survive the imposition or the replacement of the primary wall at Friendship Park? What happens to the garden when they start replacing the wall down there, which we know they're going to do very soon?
Yeah, it's not looking good as far as what Border Patrol is telling us presently. They are telling us that they need that space for the machinery, the heavy machinery. So we haven't lost hope completely that, when they replaced and they allowed us to replant the garden, it came with a promise to work with us and to make sure that didn't happen again. So we're in talks with Border Patrol to see if there's a way to save the garden from incoming walls. And it's kind of up in the air at the moment.
Very good. Well, we'll hear more about that, I'm sure. And then Mike, my question for you has to do with the question of identity. I was intrigued by what I had not known, which was that their communities in Baja California are linked linguistically to some of the communities up in northern Arizona. Have you ever heard in your many years of traveling in these parts, the identifier of Abajeño? Is that something that you have heard ongoingly or occasionally or remotely? I'm just interested. I know there was a time in history where folks in the lower parts of California distinguished themselves strongly from the Alta Californias, and the self-identifier of Abajeño was at least popular for a period of time. But do you hear that way of talking, or how do Kumeyaay people that you work with, how do they typically identify themselves?
Yeah, I haven't heard that so much. It's in the literature, but I haven't. It's kind of fallen from use.
Yeah.
Kumeyaay people call themselves Tipai or Ipai, which means Indian or person, and Ipai would be more in the northern part, like up towards Escondido and some of the reservations in the northern part of the region. Tipai further south, but the Tipai are both in San Diego County and south of the border. People also identify according to the village that they're from and their shmul, which is their clan. So there are several different kinds of identification. There is a recognition, definitely, within the Kumeyaay region of a long-term connection between people on both sides of the border. And so, for instance, recently I just saw on Facebook, I think, that some of the Kumeyaay from north of the border had brought food and other things down, I think last week, to some of the Kumeyaay at San Jose de la Zorra. I'm not sure if they went to other villages too, but so there's been a lot of interaction both ways over time. And then the Pai Pai are the ones that are closely related to Yavapai, Wallapai, and Havasupai, and up in Arizona. Their languages are closely related.
Gotcha.
So they've been rediscovering that.
Well, thank you very much. And I am going to just invite people to stop in at the Via Cafe. The Via Cafe is a online platform where you can stay connected to folks here at Via International. And we'll resume this Tuesday, 12 noon conversation on Wednesday, January 11th, 2021. I'll be sending out a survey and welcome your feedback on that. For now, we're going to sign off of Facebook. We'll continue the conversation here in Zoom. And so will you join me in a big round of applause for Dan Watman and Mike Wilken. Thank you so much.
Más unidos que nunca.